So you've given us a whole bunch of really interesting stuff to dig into about achieving success and getting into like that winner's mindset and all that. And today we're going to like zero in on Think and Grow Rich.
Yeah, Think and Grow Rich, definitely a classic.
Yeah.
And I think the goal here is to, we don't want to just like give you the Cliff's Notes version.
Right.
We want to really pull out those valuable and actionable nuggets that you can actually use and take away from this deep dive to help you gain a clearer understanding of these principles.
Yeah.
Because they really are powerful.
Oh, absolutely. And it covers a lot of ground. We're talking about everything from like the power of your desires to the importance of your imagination to really concrete things like planning and overcoming all those mental roadblocks that we all face. I mean, it's really comprehensive, isn't it?
It really is. It tries to cover every aspect
Yeah.
of what it takes to achieve success.
Okay, so let's jump right in because one of the first things that really grabbed my attention was this idea that thoughts are things.
Hmm.
And, it's not just about positive thinking in some kind of vague sense.
Right.
It's saying that your dominant thoughts, especially when they're like supercharged with a really clear purpose, real persistence, and an intense desire, what they often call a burning desire, those thoughts actually have the power to shape your reality and lead to tangible results.
Yeah, this is a core concept that runs through all these sorts of success-oriented materials.
Right.
And it's something that, it can sound kind of woo-woo at first,
Yeah.
but when you really look at it, I mean, the more you focus on something, the more you tend to create it.
Right.
And it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way.
Yeah. And the story about Edwin Barnes just totally like brings this to life. I mean, this guy had, on paper, no reason to think that he could ever be partners with Thomas Edison. He didn't even know the guy, and he
Yeah.
didn't even have the money to travel to see him.
Yeah, and this is one of those stories that I think really captures people's imagination
Right.
because it's such a, like, how did that even happen kind of story.
Yeah.
And I think that the core of it is that unwavering desire that Barnes had to work with Edison, not for him. He wasn't interested in just getting a job at Edison's company.
Right. Yeah.
He wanted to be his partner.
Yeah.
And that distinction, I think, is really key because it speaks to the level of ambition.
Right. And that unwavering desire led him to do some pretty like out there things. I mean, the story goes that he traveled by freight train just to get to Edison. That's not a casual trip.
Yeah, that's definitely a sign of commitment. I mean,
Yeah.
to travel by freight train back then, that's not something you do lightly.
Hmm.
And I think that speaks to the level of his desire and his willingness to overcome obstacles. Because when you have that kind of burning desire, obstacles just become challenges to solve rather than roadblocks.
Totally. And it's important to remember that it wasn't like an instant success story, right? He didn't just show up and bam, he's partners with Edison. It took time and effort.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a period where he's working in a pretty menial role just to be in Edison's orbit.
Yeah.
But he kept his eye on the prize, so to speak. He never lost sight of that ultimate goal of working with Edison. And eventually, that persistence paid off.
Yeah. And that really underscores the point that it's not just about wanting something, it's about having that really clearly defined desire and being willing to put in the work over time. Because most big goals, they don't happen overnight.
Right. I think one of the things that people sometimes miss is that it's not enough to just have a vague desire.
Right.
You have to be specific. You have to know exactly what you want and what it looks like. And then you have to hold that vision in your mind with clarity and with intensity.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the material also talks about this fascinating idea that wealth actually begins in a state of mind. And it mentions a research study that looked at over 25,000 people. And it observed that during the Great Depression, as fear started to give way to a more positive outlook and faith in the future, the economic situation actually started to improve. It's like there's this link between our collective psychology and how things actually play out in the real world.
Yeah, this is where you get into some of the more subtle aspects of this whole success philosophy.
Yeah.
Because what it suggests is that our mindset, our beliefs, they don't just affect us individually.
Right.
They actually ripple out and affect the world around us.
Yeah.
And in the case of the Great Depression, as people started to shift their thinking from fear and scarcity to hope and possibility, it seems like that created a more fertile ground for economic recovery.
That's wild. Right.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah. And, on a personal level, it talks about cultivating a money consciousness. It's like really filling your mind with the desire for wealth, vividly picturing yourself possessing it. And it even says that big names like Andrew Carnegie and Thomas Edison were big believers in these 6 steps for translating that desire into actual wealth.
Yeah, and the idea here is that it's not just about passively wishing for money. It's about actively engaging your mind in the process of wealth creation.
Mm.
So you're actually creating a mental blueprint of your financial goals.
Right.
And the more vividly you can imagine it, the more real it becomes in your mind.
Yeah, so you're basically programming your mind for success.
Exactly. And those 6 steps provide a framework for making that programming more effective.
Okay, so we've talked about the power of focused thought and desire, but how do we actually cultivate and control that power? And this is where it gets into faith and autosuggestion, which is a pretty interesting concept.
Yeah, this is where it starts to delve into the power of the subconscious mind. And the idea that faith is not just something that you either have or you don't,
Yeah,
but it's a state of mind that you can actually develop through autosuggestion.
right.
And autosuggestion is basically a way of communicating with your subconscious mind. And the subconscious mind is much more receptive to emotionalized instructions.
Okay, so you're essentially training your internal narrative
Yeah.
by constantly telling yourself something, even if you don't believe it at first. Eventually, your subconscious mind starts to accept it as truth. It's like rewiring your brain, almost.
Exactly. And the more emotion you can attach to those suggestions, the more powerful they become. And this is where faith comes in, because faith is a very powerful emotion. And it's the key to harnessing what the material refers to as infinite intelligence, which is this kind of universal source of knowledge and power.
Right.
And by cultivating faith, you're essentially tapping into that source.
Okay. And the cool thing is that it gives these very specific, actionable steps for using autosuggestion effectively. It says, write down a really clear statement of what you want, and by when you want it, then read this out loud twice every day while genuinely feeling like you already have it. And keep a written copy somewhere you'll see it all the time so you're constantly reminded of your goal.
Yeah, those are some really practical techniques for kind of reprogramming your mind.
Yeah.
And they work because they combine repetition with emotion.
Right.
So you're not just intellectually understanding the concept,
Right.
you're actually feeling it in your body. And that makes a huge difference.
And it actually says straight up that belief comes from repetition and
Yeah.
that we essentially become what we consistently think about. That's a pretty profound, maybe even kind of scary thought, isn't it?
Yeah, it definitely puts the responsibility on us, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because it means that if we're constantly thinking negative thoughts, worrying about things, dwelling on our limitations, then that's what we're going to create in our lives.
Right.
But on the other hand, if we can consciously cultivate positive, empowering thoughts and beliefs, then that's what we'll attract into our reality.
So our minds are super powerful, basically.
Yeah, I think that's one of the key takeaways from all this.
Okay, so let's move on to another critical piece of this whole success puzzle, and that's the power of imagination. It describes it as our inner workshop, where we actually develop plans and translate our desires into concrete actions.
Yeah, and I love how it distinguishes between 2 types of imagination:
Yeah.
synthetic imagination and creative imagination.
Yeah, explain that.
So synthetic imagination is about taking existing ideas and knowledge
Mm-hmm.
and combining them in new ways to come up with solutions and plans. This is often how we figure out the practical steps to achieve our goals.
Okay, so it's like, okay, I want this. How do I make that happen?
Exactly. And then creative imagination is more about those flashes of insight, coming up with entirely new ideas that have never existed before.
Right, right.
And while both types are valuable, the material really emphasizes synthetic imagination as the primary tool for turning desires into tangible wealth.
Okay. And it gives these great examples of successful things that came from using your imagination, like the story of the enchanted kettle that led to a wildly popular drink, or that one sermon that inspired $1 million opportunity. It's cool to see that big successes don't always just come from hard work alone, right? There's this creative element too.
Yeah, it's not always about just grinding it out.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's about having that flash of insight, that creative spark that allows you to see things differently. And it's about being willing to take a chance on those insights.
Absolutely.
Because a lot of times those are the ideas that lead to the biggest breakthroughs.
And that actually leads us nicely to the concept of organized planning and this thing called a mastermind group. Organized planning is all about taking your desires and turning them into real, actionable steps. And the mastermind is like your team of people who help you bring those plans to life.
Yeah, the mastermind principle is so crucial because it recognizes that we can achieve so much more when we work together
Right.
than we can when we try to do everything on our own. It's about leveraging the collective intelligence and experience of a group of people who are aligned in their goals and who can support each other along the way.
So it's not just about finding people who can help you. It's about creating this mutually beneficial relationship where everyone is contributing and receiving value.
Exactly. It's about synergy, where the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Cool.
And it's about finding people who have different strengths and perspectives that complement your own. Because when you have a diverse group of people working together, that's where the real magic happens.
Now let's shift gears a little bit and talk about how these principles apply to your career, specifically how you present yourself and your skills. It even talks about how in the future, jobs are going to be more like partnerships, where the golden rule and serving others effectively become even more important.
Yeah. And I think this speaks to a shift that's already happening in the workplace,
Yeah,
where it's becoming less about just doing your job and more about building relationships and providing real value.
right.
And I think the golden rule is a great guiding principle for that because it really boils down to treating others how you would want to be treated.
Right.
And when you approach work with that mindset, it changes everything.
Yeah, totally. And it introduces this QQS formula, quality, quantity, and spirit of service. Can you unpack that for us?
Sure. So quality of service means doing your work with a high level of excellence and always striving to improve.
Okay,
Quantity of service is about being productive and delivering a good amount of work.
gotcha.
And the spirit of service is all about having a positive and helpful attitude, being a team player, and genuinely wanting to contribute.
So all three of those are important for long-term success.
Absolutely. You can't really neglect any of them.
Right. But it also says that a really great personality and a harmonious spirit can sometimes make up for minor shortcomings in either quality or quantity. But it's really clear that good conduct is essential no matter what.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because it suggests that interpersonal skills are just as important as technical skills.
Right.
And in many cases, they can be even more important.
So how you treat people really matters.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, people want to work with people they like and trust.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then there's this whole section on creating this really compelling brief of your qualifications when you're looking for a new job. It even compares it to a lawyer preparing a case brief, which shows you how seriously you should take this.
Yeah, and this goes beyond just having a resume.
Yeah.
This is about putting together a really comprehensive package that showcases your skills and experience in a way that's tailored to the specific job you're applying for.
Okay, so like really doing your research and making sure that your brief highlights the things that are most relevant to that particular employer.
Exactly. And it's about going the extra mile to show that you're serious and that you've put in the effort to understand their needs.
And it even gives specific recommendations for what to include, like detailed info on your education and work experience, actual copies of recommendation letters, a professional photo, a clear statement of the job you want and why you're perfect for it, and even showing that you know about the company's business.
Yeah, it's about leaving no stone unturned
Hmm.
and presenting yourself in the best possible light.
And the presentation of this brief is also important. It recommends having it typed or bound, maybe even with some personalized lettering. It's all about making a strong and professional first impression.
Yeah, because first impressions matter a lot.
Definitely.
And if you can show that you've put in the effort to create a really polished and professional presentation, that's going to speak volumes about your work ethic and attention to detail.
Now, we all know that the path to success isn't always easy, and this material lays out 30 major causes of failure, which might seem a bit daunting at first.
Yeah, it's a pretty comprehensive list.
But it's also a great chance to really look at yourself honestly and see where you might be holding yourself back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because sometimes we're our own worst enemies.
Yeah. So just to mention a few, this list includes things like not having a clear purpose in life, not being ambitious enough, not having the right knowledge, lacking self-discipline, not taking care of your health, being around negative people, procrastinating, not being persistent enough, having a negative personality, wanting something for nothing, being indecisive, letting fears control you, choosing the wrong partner, being too cautious, hanging out with the wrong people, being
Yeah.
superstitious, being in the wrong career, not being able to focus, spending money unwisely, not being enthusiastic, being intolerant, having bad habits, not being able to cooperate with others, not working hard enough, being dishonest, being too egotistical, guessing instead of thinking things through, and not having enough capital. Ew, that's a lot.
It is a lot, but it covers a lot of ground.
Yeah,
And the point is not to make you feel overwhelmed.
right.
It's to help you identify potential areas where you might be self-sabotaging.
Okay.
Because once you know what those areas are, you can start to address them.
And then it gets even deeper and talks about what it calls the 6 basic fears that humans face: fear of poverty, fear of criticism, fear of ill health, fear of loss of love, fear of old age, and fear of death. And it says that these fears are often at the root of many of our problems and anxieties.
Yeah, these are like the universal fears that everyone experiences to some degree.
Right.
And understanding them is really important because they can drive so much of our behavior without us even realizing it.
So let's take the fear of poverty as an example. It lists things like indifference, indecision, doubt, worry, being overly cautious, and procrastinating as symptoms of this fear. It paints a picture of someone who's basically paralyzed by the fear of not having enough.
Yeah, and I think that's a common pattern.
Yeah,
People who are afraid of poverty often avoid taking risks, they second-guess themselves constantly, and they have trouble making decisions.
right.
And that can create a self-fulfilling prophecy where they end up staying stuck in poverty because they're so afraid of it.
And the fear of ill health has its own set of issues, like thinking negative thoughts about getting sick all the time, imagining you have illnesses you don't, avoiding exercise, actually becoming more susceptible to getting sick, worrying too much about medical bills and dying, playing the victim to get sympathy, and even turning to bad habits to cope. It shows how strong the connection is between our minds and our bodies, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And this is something that's becoming more and more recognized in modern medicine.
Yeah.
The mind-body connection is real, and our thoughts and beliefs can have a profound impact on our physical health.
And then it briefly touches on the fear of old age, often tying it back to fears about being poor, negative societal views about aging, and worrying about becoming less attractive and vital.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people struggle with this fear
Yeah,
because it's tied to this idea of loss.
right.
Loss of youth, loss of vitality, loss of independence.
And loss of control, probably.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But a recurring theme and a key element for overcoming all of these potential pitfalls seems to be developing unwavering persistence.
Yeah, persistence is essential for achieving any significant goal
Right,
because there are always going to be challenges and setbacks.
right.
And if you give up too easily, you'll never get to where you want to go.
And it lays out 4 steps for developing the super important quality of persistence. First, you have to have that clearly defined purpose that's fueled by a burning desire. Second, you need a concrete plan, and you have to consistently put in the work. Third, you got to protect your mind from negative influences and discouragement. And fourth, surround yourself with a supportive mastermind group. It really seems like all of these principles we're talking about work together, right?
Yeah, they're all interconnected
Yeah.
and they build upon each other.
Right.
So, having a strong desire gives you the fuel to keep going. A clear plan gives you direction. A positive mindset helps you stay motivated. And a supportive group gives you accountability and encouragement.
And it uses the story of Muhammad as a really powerful example of persistence in the face of just insane amounts of ridicule, rejection, and difficulty. It
Wow.
kind of puts our everyday struggles into perspective.
Yeah, Muhammad's story is one of those epic stories of persistence.
Yeah,
And it shows what's possible when you refuse to give up on your vision.
yeah. And the material also says that every failure actually holds the seed of an equal or greater benefit, and that we often face the toughest challenges right before we're about to achieve something amazing. That's a pretty encouraging thought, isn't it?
It is. It's a reminder that setbacks are not the end of the story.
Right.
They're often just a necessary part of the journey.
Yeah. Now, it's time to expand our idea of what riches actually means. It's obviously not just about money, right? The material emphasizes a more well-rounded view, including financial, spiritual, mental, and material well-being. It's about having a rich and balanced life overall.
Yeah, I think that's a much more holistic and fulfilling definition of wealth. Because ultimately, what's the point of having all the money in the world if you're miserable, unhealthy, and lonely?
Right, exactly.
True wealth is about having abundance in all areas of your life.
And it specifically talks about the freedoms we have, especially in a country like the US, as being huge opportunities for building this multidimensional wealth. Things like freedom of thought and expression, education, religion, politics, choosing your job or business, owning property, living where you want, choosing who you marry, having equal opportunities, traveling, having access to food. and being able to aim for any position in life. It's a pretty amazing list when you think about it.
Yeah, those freedoms are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
And they create a foundation for individual growth and prosperity that's really unique.
And it uses this everyday example of having breakfast to show how much goes on behind the scenes, all the organized capital, infrastructure, and work from tons of people to bring us even the most basic things in life. It's a good reminder that all of these opportunities we have are built on something much bigger than ourselves.
Yeah, it's easy to take those things for granted.
Yeah.
But when you really stop and think about it, it's amazing how much goes into creating even the simplest things that we enjoy every day.
And then there's this law of economics, which basically says that you have to give something of value in exchange for what you receive. And it stresses that real lasting wealth comes from providing a useful service to others, not from forcing or manipulating people or acting unethically.
Yeah, this is a fundamental principle of ethical wealth creation.
Right.
And it's about creating win-win situations where everyone benefits.
So it's not about taking advantage of others.
Right. It's about providing real value and being fairly compensated for it.
And lastly, it's about the power of decisions. It says that every big achievement, every significant breakthrough starts with a clear, solid decision.
Yeah, decisions are the catalysts for action.
Yeah.
Without a decision, nothing happens.
Right. And it gives us some really powerful examples from history of people who made courageous decisions that changed the world, like Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation, Socrates standing up for what he believed in, Robert E. Lee choosing to fight for the Confederacy, and of course, the signing of the Declaration of Independence. These were all risky choices, but they had a huge impact.
Yeah, and those decisions weren't made lightly.
Right.
They required a lot of courage and conviction. But they also demonstrate the power of a single decision to change the course of history.
The lead up to the Declaration of Independence is especially fascinating, with people like John Hancock, Samuel Adams, and Richard Henry Lee really pushing for independence. Even though they were risking their lives by doing so, it shows how a small group of people who are really determined and united in their decision can start a huge movement.
Yeah, it's an inspiring example of the power of collective action.
Yeah.
And it shows that even when the odds are stacked against you, if you're committed to your cause and you're willing to take a stand, you can achieve amazing things.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. And the big takeaway is that achieving success and developing a wealth mindset isn't just about one thing. It's about understanding the power of your thoughts, nurturing your faith, using your imagination, making plans, working with others, overcoming fears, being persistent, recognizing opportunities, being ethical, and making strong decisions.
It's a holistic process that involves all aspects of your being.
And it's a journey, not a destination.
Exactly. It's about constant growth and evolution.
So as a final thought for you to ponder, what principle that we discussed today really stands out to you? Which one resonates the most with your goals and challenges? And what's one small action you can take right now, today, to start putting that principle into practice in your own life? We really encourage you to spend some time thinking about how your desires, your beliefs, your planning, and your actions all work together to help you create your own definition of riches.
That's a great question to reflect on.
Thank you so much for sharing these awesome resources with us and for letting us go on this deep dive with you. We hope this exploration has given you some valuable insights and practical things you can use to create the life you want.
Absolutely.
And remember, keep thinking big, keep pushing forward, and never give up on your dreams.
I agree. Those are words to live by.
And that's a wrap on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.
See you then.
Bye.